This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Welcome to episode 1 of the Practice of Learning Teams. On today's show, we're joined by Dr. Todd Conklin, the godfather of learning teams. In this two-part series, Todd will share with us about the past, the present, and the future of learning teams. Join us now in this wonderful conversation with Todd. Look, welcome, Todd, to episode 1, number 1, first episode of the Practice of Learning Team.
This is the maiden voyage of your podcast?
It is. It's the
wow,
number.
What an honor.
And if we can get half of it right, I'll be happy.
I'm not sure you'll ever get I don't think podcasts are right or wrong. So I think podcasts are just conversations. And to me, there's not a right or wrong. I would just talk to lots of people outside of the field.
And we're certainly going to be embracing diversity of thought, as we say.
Amen, brother.
Process, absolutely. And we're going to be trying to, through the series, we're going to be talking to different people on their journey, which I think is amazing. And what's really important is that the listeners out there get to participate as well. And we've built what's called a learning journal. So at the end of every podcast, myself, Glynis and Brent Robinson, we get together and we reflect on what the other person has spoken about. And then we ask the listeners to participate in a journal so that they can give us their feedback and in particular talk to us about when do they see opportunities for learning teams and where do they see the barriers for learning teams within the organizational context.
Wow, impressive. How come you don't call your podcast Two Brents and a Glynis?
Well, that's actually interesting. Yesterday, Jay called it Glynis and Brent times 2.
Or Brent squared. That would work.
Yeah, we are. And we're also doing a once a week on LinkedIn. There's going to be the Glynis Minute.
Oh, nice.
Glynis.
Yeah, nice. That's good.
The Bare Essentials from Brent Robinson, where he looks at the lean side. And then for me, I'm going to be doing a little 1-minute thing called the Spotlight on BS.
Nice. That's your initials.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I got it. It's you know that it has another meaning, right?
Well, we're hopeful, but that's about as controversial as we can get.
But even New Zealand has bulls.
It does, and quite a bit of it.
Yeah, quite, yeah.
As part of our approach, because like you guys, we have an election coming up.
Yes.
So
Good luck, my brother.
To see how elections function.
Take nothing for granted. Take nothing for granted.
But look, what I thought, episode 1, what I thought would be really useful for the listeners is to basically hear how this crazed idea came about.
So that's a good question. So we'd had a really interesting series of operational events at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and we were doing a lot of investigations, and we had a cadre of investigators who eventually also became auditors. So, which is, I think, efficient to have auditors and investigators coexist. But the problem is that an audit seeks deviation and reinforces compliance. And what was happening is our investigations would then therefore seek deviation and really reinforce compliance. It's like so many other companies. It wasn't really an unusual problem, but it was interesting. And my boss, Chris Cantwell, he said, God, I wish there was a way we could just put a bunch of employees in the room and just ask them, what do we need to know about this event? And I said, well, it seems like we could do that anytime. And he said, why don't we just do it? And I said, okay, consider it done. And so we were looking at, it's funny, Brent, I can't remember what the event is. I remember the next event because that's kind of important to the story. But the event we're looking at, we brought together a group of workers and we basically just said, this event happened. We can't suck it back. I mean, there's no way to change history. What should we learn from this? And it was amazing, because at first the workers were like, well, how much truth can you handle? Can you handle the truth? How honest you want us to be? And I'm like, near as I could tell, we got about the greenest light we could get on this. The big boss said, do it. Let's just do it. So let's just be honest. So we started talking. And as every good meeting goes, somebody jumped up to the flip chart and started writing down what people were saying. And in a really short amount of time, I mean, stunningly short amount of time, considering we went through the whole storming, norming, forming, and performing, the phases of sort of, you remember those?
Yes.
Right? Did I get them right?
Close. Yeah.
Yeah, I was close enough, right? Considering we went through all those steps of building trust and opening communication, we probably within the first 45 minutes had the best, deepest understanding of the event that transpired that the organization had ever had. Certainly better than the investigation. And again, the investigators weren't bad at all. They're really good. They're amazing people. But it was just such a different approach. And then out of that, we decided, well, maybe we should give them some suggestions for solutions. And so once we had a really good understanding of what the problem was, which is something that always has to exist, and I knew that from working with groups my whole career, that you have to define the problem before you can create the solution. So once we had a really good list of what the problem is, and we had this amazing list of conditions, and I just called them I didn't know what else to call them. I don't know what you'd call them. They could be factors, I guess, but they were just conditioned. And it was remarkable, because none of the comments made by that team were about the people. They didn't talk about mistakes or errors in judgment or not following. They just talked about the work. And then when we went into the solution set, they actually had some really great ideas that didn't track with the corrective actions that were a part of the investigation and the management review. So we had kind of an alternative set of data that we gathered in kind of a cool way. So I checked back in with my boss, as was the practice. Before you go home, you kind of go hang out in your boss's office, or we did, because Chris was he still is. He was an amazing guy. And he just said, well, how'd the great experiment go? And I said, dude, we should be doing this for everything. I said, this was amazing. I said, it was faster. It was way more palatable. And it was much better information. And people left engaged and happy. I said, it's kind of an amazing tool. And he said, well, what should we call it? And I remember I was standing in the hallway in front of his office, and I said, I don't know, let's not give it some kind of gimmicky name. Let's make the name describe what it is. And he said, well, what are you thinking? And I said, let's call them learning teams. And we called them learning teams. And the amazing thing is now I kind of wish we'd have named them something differently, because I'm not sure I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if it's the best name or not. It's the name that you make up in the hallway. But I remember talking to Chris and saying, let's make the name describe what it is. So let's not call them, grassroots safety or informal investigation or employee engagement sessions. Let's just call it a learning team. It's a team of people brought together in an ad hoc fashion, almost always directly involved with the event or potential event, unless they're not. And the reason I say unless they're not is because we learned really early that sometimes you need to bring engineering in, or sometimes you need to bring maintenance in, or sometimes you need to bring in somebody who has expertise about a process, because the more you look at the conditions present in the event, the more the event moves from the ash pile, from the consequence, back into the context. And the context is almost always a place where the workers have very, very little influence and even smaller amounts of control.
And look, what's interesting, you're picking up on that, just your comment about the name of it. Putting marketing stuff aside, a learning team, when you say to a bunch of workers we're running a learning team, they know what you mean. Yeah, no, it's because, and it's because I said we should not name them something gimmicky, because we were so is your company, so is everybody's company. We're famous for thinking up gimmicky names. Yeah. Oh,
but I just said, let's call it what it is. Now, here's my problem: is now it freaks me out when I read academic papers or when I look at advertisements globally, where they'll have a workshop on learning team or learning team effectiveness or learning team. That you see them all the time, and I always think about standing in that hallway in front of my boss's office, just making that name up. And I thought, had I known that opportunity, I would have named him, like a Todd team.
Todd.
Don't you think that would have been a cool name for him, Todd team? But then it wouldn't have met my test.
I can see the T-shirt and the cap.
Yeah, and the hat.
And the hat.
Yeah.
It'll be there. No, the other day I got told it's simply a dialogic discussion with diverse groups of stakeholders. And I said, what would that mean to a worker?
Yeah, exactly. And the answer is not jack squat is what and you're right. I mean, you're right. In our need to give it sort of an academic name or a gimmicky name or a clever name. And they're all sort of equally, I mean, I don't think none of it's bad, right? But I remember telling Chris, let's make the name describe what it is. So then, and my thinking was, when we ask people to be on it, we don't have to spend a lot of time explaining dialogic engagement session, right? Or stakeholder feedback. What we could say is, we're going to get together and this happened or almost happened, and we can't suck it back. I mean, it's not going back in. So what can we learn from it? And so it was really important to have the word learning in it. And then, I don't know, team just sort of seemed like the right thing to do.
Well,
so, and it's funny how they've changed and grown and morphed and now it's quite an effective tool. And I don't think this idea was necessarily a new idea. I'm not sure there are many new ideas. And I think that in quality, they've been doing sort of these engagement sessions. Safety was late to the game, but that's because we're always kind of late to the game. I mean, that's how we roll. But I think even like going to the Gemba, all those kind of things that you talk about, what are the Japanese circles? Kaizens? Is it Kaizen?
Kaizen events, yeah, Gimbas,
Kaizen, right? Yeah, all those things are all a part of it. But it was really important to make them informal, and it was really important to make them ad hoc, so that you could subtract and add people as needed. Because you've done a bunch of learning teams, and I've done a bazillion, right? It becomes really obvious when people are in the room that don't need to be, and it's kind of cool to say, yeah, I mean, maybe you're not as vital to this discussion, or you weren't as big a part of this failure as we thought you might be. You guys, you can stay if you want to, but there's no need to stay. And lots of times people are kind of relieved and they got plenty to do, so they go to work. What I found more interesting is the ability to bring people in because of the informality, because that's harder to do with a lean team or a Kaizen team or those kind of teams. But here you make a phone call. You're like, oh God, we should talk to somebody in finance. And pretty soon finance, you make a call and somebody from finance runs down the hall and you speed them up on the session and they start talking about almost always whatever kind of limiting factors around the conditions existed. We didn't have the budget, we didn't have the money, or it takes a long time to do that kind of stuff.
Which is what they're dealing with every day.
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing is that
simply recall it every day.
It recognizes the expertise for knowledge on that event or near event exists with the people who actually had the event. It doesn't exist with managers or supervisors or planners or even engineers. It exists with the people who are loading the truck or
because
shutting off the furnace, whatever they're doing.
Because as we know, everyone has a different view about risk.
Yeah, completely. And then add to that everyone's perception of risk is different and risk itself is dynamic. It's kind of crazy to think we spent the last 50 years plus believing we could rank risk, we could assess risk, and we could manage risk. When in reality, I think we have kind of even a difficult time defining risk.
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that we're probably better off being able to have a good shot at what harm the hazard can cause, but how it can cause harm can be quite variable.
Yeah. Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
To me, I've become more interested in how we can safeguard against multiple harms. So instead of looking at risk and thinking, I need to understand and manage risk, I just assume risk is high and incredibly dynamic. What I want to control's the wrong word. That was a little bit of a Freudian slip. What I want to understand is what kind of tolerances we can put in the system and what kind of safeguards we can put in the system. That seems more interesting to me. And that's kind of the great move from stopping the job before it fails to starting the job when the controls are in place.
Well, I remember, Todd, when I first met you, apart from your opening line of the sleeping pill laxative, which is a classic.
What did I say? I interrupted you.
When I first met you, apart from your classic one-liner of a sleeping pill and a laxative.
Oh yes.
Which by the way, I think should have its own little HBO show.
Yeah, it needs one.
It'd be really valuable. One of the things that was really compelling, but was so obvious, but just wasn't thought about, was the fact that you said, people could only be killed because the hazard releases energy.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And the people that know the best about how hazard releases energy are the people that are exposed to the hazard.
Yeah. It's kind of a linear deconstruction of hazard. And it's probably too linear for like Sidney Decker and those guys. But I mean, the bottom line is the reason people die from falls is because of the landing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's
absolutely.
It's uncontrolled energy.
That hurts.
Yeah. And so therefore, if we are serious about this, and we have been in fall protection is a really good example to show, we don't really think about preventing the fall because we assume a fall's not a choice. We always assume a fall's an accident. They accidentally fell, right? And so we don't actually tell people don't fall because that's stupid. What we do is we say when they fall, we will provide some kind of capacity in the system so that they don't fall to their death. They're still going to fall, but they're not going to fall to their death. And it's a really interesting question. I remember asking a board of directors, big fancy board of directors too, if they would trade a broken arm for a dead worker. Right. And they looked at me like I was nuts. Like, what who the hell are you? And they really did. They're just like, what kind of blasphemy is this? And finally I said, it's a serious question. Would you trade a broken arm for a dead guy? And they all said, well, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah. And I said, then you have to make it okay to break an arm. Because right now, it's just like they're dead when you break the arm because we treat a broken arm as if the entire universe failed. But if a guy falls off a work platform and his harness catches him and he breaks his arm, I would actually suggest that's a success because the potential outcome is fatality. Mm-hmm. The injury is just a kind of a ancillary cost to not dying. Well, and then when we get at not killing people, and we'll eventually get good at not killing people, we're getting better every day at not killing people, then we can focus more on not hurting people. But thinking they're the same thing, that's really caused a lot of damage. Man, I'm all over the place this morning. I can't have a topic, clearly.
Look, for me, what organizations see from a learning team in particular, that things that control, and I think the word control is correct for a hazard, things that control the hazard releasing energy and things that try and influence people are completely different.
Yeah, and they should be.
Yeah.
Right? Because an engineer control doesn't work with crap for people.
Yeah.
Right? Because I can, you can put stanchions and make me walk in one way. But if there was a gold bar on the other side of that stanchion, I'd probably climb over the stanchion to get the gold bar or a candy bar.
Candy bar, yeah.
Or Tim Tam. I would do almost anything to have a Tim Tam.
Yeah, or a
because the one sad thing about the quarantine is that I have dramatically reduced my annual Tim Tam consumption to zero. I'm at zero Tim Tams in more than 6 months.
Wow.
I know. it's tragic.
What's happened to the share price
Of Tim Tams?
Yeah,
It's probably bottomed out. One of their major consumers.
but like the price of Corona at bottom.
That's right. It's gone. It's a cost.
It's a cost. And how do you feel, Todd, about sort of one of the things that we talked about in the book was making learning teams stand alone by itself. That learning teams can work across any system.
Yeah, so I think that's brilliant. And I would tell you that in my little concept of a learning team, I think I agree completely. That you can use the learning team for really anything that would be benefited by understanding and learning, right?
Yeah.
So you can, I mean, the best learning team stories, which you'll start to have millions of them because you're collecting them, which is such a cool idea. The best learning team stories are almost never safety stories, although they're great safety stories. But, they're learning teams put together for an operational problem or a production problem, right? And what's funny is that it's the same co-creation of an understanding of really formulation of the problem. I mean, that's what you're doing is you're using the team to identify conditions so you have a better understanding of the problem. It's all about the problem statement. And then once the problem statement is clear, the solution's pretty easy. I mean, they sort of write themselves. And you'll know you're successful.
They do write themselves. They do.
You'll know you're successful with a learning team in your organization when they happen without you, which I absolutely guarantee without hesitation that they will happen without you. So if you're trying to track them and account for every learning team, I mean, good on you, good luck and stuff. The problem is that once you teach this technique and once people use it, it's so efficient and so painless, emotionally painless. It's often painfully technically, but it's emotionally painless that they'll just use it. And what you'll start seeing out on the production floor, I mean, this happened to us, is you'll see flip charts living in the field with lists of conditions on them. And you'll look at them and think, well, there's only one thing that this represents. A group of workers swarmed together and actually made a list of conditions so they could better understand the problem. And then you're like, I guess we're done. I mean, that's as good as it gets. It doesn't get better than that. That's the top.
And in my time, I've never, when we run a learning team, we always get the people that participate to share with us how they felt about it. And as you know, if you typically get the bell curve, you'll have some that love it.
Isn't that the point of a bell curve?
That less love it, and others that thought it was a waste of time.
Isn't a bell curve always typically isn't that the very point of a bell curve?
It is.
There'll always be a bell curve. Isn't that how bell curves work?
But I've never ever had anyone say that they felt the learning team was a waste of their time.
Yeah, and part of it is because they're really valuable and they're pretty fun and they're engaging. And the other part of it is if they don't fit, if they don't belong there, if they don't know anything about it, then chances are pretty high they don't need to be in the learning team. And right. Chances are even higher they wouldn't be invited, but they're not exclusive. Now, I think they can get too big. So I don't know what you've found, but to me, the sweet spot is about 5 to 7. And then I always, for the second meeting, I always want to add a new person.
Absolutely, getting that different perspective later on.
Well, yeah. So I want a differing opinion, right? I want a DPO, but I also want the team to have to summarize what they did the first session to bring that person along. So because then you get a really good snapshot of how they've thought about and processed the information since we last met. And there's always a much more fine edge on the detail of the conditions, and they always have sort of drifted to things they think are really important. It's not terribly scientific. I mean, maybe it is. It's just not scientific in my world. It's different than a focus group, and focus groups are legit. They're used for research all over the world, but it's not that different from a focus group. I think it's different from a focus group in that it was formed to solve a problem. The challenge is is we just don't know what the problem is. So the first problem they solve, the sense-making part of this, which is really important, and you can kind of see when you deconstruct this and look backwards why it's successful. In complex systems, interrelated, interconnected, intercoupled, right? The definition of complexity. It's the sum of the parts that are always more interesting in an emergent fashion than any one individual part. And so a learning team really allows you to identify the interrelatedness, the interconnectedness, the sum of the parts by talking to people who actually use and own the entire system, or to sort of talk in Dave Woods fashions, they sort of complete the design of the system in actually performing the operational activity.
And look, I think, one of the other things that's really important is that the learning team gives visibility and transparency to that
Yeah.
context. And
Yeah,
risk management is
a
driven
really
by
good
context.
observation.
Yeah,
That's a really smart observation you just made. You can take tomorrow off because it's incredibly transparent.
correct.
I mean, it's incredibly transparent. There's nothing about it that's in the smoke-filled room. There's nothing about it that's at the management level that you can't have access, or you're too dumb to know this, or you're not powerful, or you're not in the right classification to be at this meeting. It's really transparent. And it's pretty much anyone who understands and was involved in what happened or nearly happened can be a part of that conversation. It should be a part of that conversation.
And it's not about right or wrongs.
Yeah, there are no right and wrong.
Oh.
That's the best part of a learning team, is that chances are really high that the problem you think you're going in to solve will not be the problem you actually leave the room
With absolutely. Yeah.
solved.
Yeah, correct. And look, and we've used some fancy pants words in the book, Todd. We talked about, the importance of having functional diversity being part of the team, which is basically,
Well, that's brilliant, right? I mean, that's exactly what you want. And it is. It sounds very fancy pants. It seems like you could put that in your dissertation title.
Mm-hmm.
A narrative study of functional diversity and emergent learning in emergent dialogic. I don't know. I'll think of some other name for it.
Well, in our new world, anything with the word diversity, I get medals being minted for me.
Yes,
so we've got functional diversity, and then we've got diversity of thought.
Right, but diversity is so paramount in creating resilience. And you have to. I mean, it's so is transparency, but you have to have. Diversity is many things, but you want diverse opinions, diverse ideas. You want to really be squared away in understanding that you're shooting with a wide scatter, not a narrow scatter, and that's really valuable because the context that you're going to gain. So the event that happened didn't start because of the root cause. I put quotes around that when I said root cause. It started way earlier. The seeds for tomorrow's disaster are planted today. And we've always known that. That's not interesting knowledge. It's just that our tools have said, basically look at the triggering event and call that causal. So normally then what happens is the last person to touch it screwed it up.
That's right.
And we would dutifully do these investigations, and quite dutifully, with good intent, with good people, to basically determine that somehow the worker failed to insert your comment here, and therefore that's why the failure happened. Right? And that's just another elaborate way of blaming people. But what it really is it goes directly to kind of the first principles of the new understanding of reliability, which is that the worker's not the problem. The worker, in fact, is the problem solver.
So, look, I was wrapping up a case just recently where a worker lost part of his hand in a machine, and the regulator was involved, and they wanted them to provide effectively a form of investigation. And I sent them the learning team.
Yeah, I bet they loved it too.
Well, no, the response was, where are the signed statements?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Where's this and where is that?
Yes.
Yeah. And and my response was, we undertook a restorative process.
Yeah.
Where the person who was harmed was able to participate.
That makes me ask this question because that means we didn't till the soil well enough with the regulators so that they knew what was coming, right? So you sort of surprised them with the new product. It's really funny. I found, so we took a little heat when we first started learning teams. Same reason, but we have this format. We have a management review board. We have, an investigation protocol. We have a system by which we track this kind of learning. And you're not doing any of that crap because you're doing these learning teams. And what was interesting is that once we presented the new learning team work product, then in fact, people kind of got addicted to it. I mean, because the data was so much better, right? They understood so much better. Because no senior leader or regulator really wants a root cause. They say they want a root cause because it's easy and lazy. What they really want is an explanation. I mean, they want to understand what happened. And the learning team gives them such a more complete understanding of what happened that they're really happy about it. And what happened with us, which was really interesting, is that the regulators started expecting that. Right. They'd expect a learning team work product. And when we'd send them up a standard investigation, they would often write a letter back to say, could you actually give us your learning team notes on this? We're interested in the learning team work product. And so then it became really easy, and I didn't have to sell the learning team idea really to anybody. I mean, the regulator liked it. Management really liked it. I mean, they really liked it because they learned so much. I mean, well, the corrective actions were done for them, and that was handy, right? But they learned so much more, and they understood how to make sustainable improvement. It'll be interesting to see in this new world, post-COVID world or COVID world. I don't think we're post-COVID by a long shot. So what's happening is that the world we were in 8 months ago was really aligned towards efficiency. So all of our analysis, our investigations were incredibly efficient. Like we'd have pull down menus so we could efficiently track events, at the enterprise level. We built investigation tools to be efficient, to really serve as accounting systems. And now 8 months later, the need to optimize for efficiency is not nearly as important as it once was. Now there's a real need to build resilience. And you must hear it all the time. I hear it all the time on the news when I talk to senior leaders. The word resilience is really tossed around a lot. And so in order to really create a learning product that supports resilience, we're going to have to move more towards a learning team model because it allows us to capture not just what happened, but it allows us to capture all the places where the system is incredibly fragile, where the black line and the blue line are really, really close to each other, or the red line and the blue line are really, really close to each other. There's just not a lot of capacity for variability.
That brings to the end of part 1 with Todd. Join us next time in part 2 where Todd explores the future of learning teams. Thank you, listeners, for being part of this podcast. We'd love to hear your learnings from today or other topics you would like us to support you on. Go to www.podcastlearnings.com and be part of the community practice of learning teams at www.learningteamscommunity.com.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.